Hello, Miami. This is 305 Sports Now, your home podcast and channel for all things Miami sports related. I am Will. First things foremost, I want to say Happy New Year, and I'm officially back from Orlando. All right, you guys know I was out for a week in the Magic City, and I did a couple shows, right from the house I was staying at, the Airbnb I was staying at. So I'm glad to be back in my oficina, known as the studio. And for today's guest to ring in the 2024 year, he's a very good friend of the show. I'm a big fan of this guy for a long time, so I'm very gracious that he's on here on a regular basis. But you know him as a host of Locked On Canes and occasional host at WQAM, Mr. Alex Donno. Alex, what's up?
Hey, Will. Happy New Year, my friend. Thank you so much for having me on. I hope you had a great trip. I know a week in Orlando, especially with kids, can be exhausting. So hopefully you've gotten some rest.
Yeah, it was fun, man. We stayed mostly at the house. It was a good time. The house had a game room, so I had a whole game room. So my kid who likes cars, he got to play Fast and Furious, in like an arcade style game, quite a bit. So he had a great time. His uncle, built. He's very good with his hands, so he built him because he can't reach the pedals. I don't know what that is. Being that Luke is very young as well, He couldn't reach the pedals. So his uncle Ed, a shout out to Uncle Ed. Built him this little thing where it had foam and he was able to push the pedal down.
Oh, cool.
So it was quite unique and neat, man. And so on. And of course, I kept playing basketball the whole time inside the, shooting the free throws and so on.
Awesome.
So that was a good time. All right, man. So since I've been gone, the Pinstripe Bowl didn't turn out the way you and I both felt it would turn out, despite the fact that Miami had a lot of opt-outs. In general, we both felt, based upon watching your show and on here, I've said that the recruiting that Miami does comparable to Rutgers, Miami should still have more talent on the field. But no one told Rutgers that, as they literally ran over Miami for 208 total yards rushing, gashing the Miami defense, defeating the Canes by a score of 31-24. But the talk of that game, prior and during the game, was the actual play of Ja'Cory Brown. In my perspective, Ja'Cory played like I expected him to play. He made some throws because, he made some throws I expected him to make, especially the fact that he was working on the intermediate routes and so on. He made some plays with his legs like I expected him because, he's a very athletic. But he also has some misses as well. He had a slant to Elijah Royal. He threw it behind him. But that's expected since he really didn't play it down in real action, throughout the whole year. What was your take on Ja'Cory and the game in general?
Yeah, I'll start with Brown. I thought he did quite well. He didn't go out there and blow me away to the point where I'm saying, hey, forget about any other quarterback. This is your guy in 2024. I wasn't quite there yet, but he definitely showed positive signs for his development. He hit 2 out of his 4 deep throws, but really should have been 3 out of 4 because on Miami's first offensive play, he threw a dime to Jacoby George that should have been 75-yard touchdown, but George dropped it. So he really should have been 3 out of 4 on his deep balls. You mentioned him missing some throws. The interception that he threw was just a poor decision to throw that football. But overall, I think we've definitely seen Brown improving his accuracy and his timing on some of the intermediate throws, and he's always had a really good arm for deep throws, and his deep throws were accurate. I mean, the touchdown pass that he threw to Xavier Restrepo, I thought was a tremendous throw and an even better catch. He made a great throw to X, the touchdown that didn't count because they determined that X, wasn't in bounds. I know that was a big argument and debate among Hurricanes fans, but that was a really good throw as well to the corner of the end zone by Ja'Cory Brown. So I thought he did pretty well, and I'm happy that he's announced he's staying. He did not enter the transfer portal, so he wants to compete for playing time in 2024 and then try to become the starter in 2025. I was overall happy with the way that he played. Now, team-wise, obviously, I wasn't overall happy with the performance of the Pinstripe Bowl. The big thing you notice from the first quarter was embarrassing for Miami. No tackling, no effort, couldn't get into any offensive rhythm in the first quarter. Only one team showed up. Miami didn't show up until the second quarter. In the second quarter, the offense started clicking a little bit. They started to get some tackles for loss on defense. I did think Ruben Bain played really well on defense. Xavier Restrepo, I thought, was the player of the game overall, obviously the player of the game on offense. And, when you talk about this whole discussion about opt-outs and depth, I definitely agree that, on paper, Miami still had a more talented team on the field than Rutgers. I mean, where it gets kind of complicated, and this is not me making excuses or anything, because I was disappointed with the way Miami played. I think continuity is important, right? When Miami has, a lot of guys who weren't regular starters they had higher stars coming out of high school than the Rutgers guys did. But, when you're talking about having about 17 players who either opted out for, go to the NFL or to transfer to other schools, and you're plugging in a lot of different starters who don't have a lot of experience and hadn't played together. That was evident. It was evident on Miami's offensive line that you didn't have the sort of chemistry you had throughout the year, because in every regular season game, you had the same 5 starters on offensive line. That wasn't the case in the Pinstripe Bowl. And, Mario Cristobal's nephew, Lou Cristobal Jr., I'm sure he's a great dude. He struggled a little bit from a blocking standpoint. And the other part that kind of annoyed me about the game, Will, was that I didn't like how they allowed Jacoby George to stay on the field for basically
Yeah.
the entire game, despite the fact that he committed all those selfish penalties, right? I like him. I'm not saying kick him off the team or anything like that, but when you have a guy who picks up these personal fouls that are not football plays, like taunting penalties, I don't care how little depth you have in that game. I think you have to show some tough love, and you have to bench him, because you don't want to send the message to your team that those sort of plays are tolerated. So I thought that was where coaching dropped the ball a little bit to allow him to stay on the field, despite the fact that mentally he was just not in it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I thought that Jacoby should have been benched after that. One of the things that Mario preaches about is accountability, and he showed accountability when Keontre Smith had a similar violation, during the season, when he got pretty much benched, for the entire game, as one. He even told a reporter he won't be on the field, and I think that, this is a time where you could have had something like a Robbie Washington or a Nathaniel Joseph, take up for what Jacoby George would have left, overproduction, on the field as well. But you have to be consistent, even with your star players. You have to send a message that won't be tolerated, because if not, it's the same thing that we complained about culture wise during the
Yep.
previous coaches, that they let, players run the show, even though I don't think that's happening. And Mario has, when he's dropped the hammer, he has dropped the hammer, a couple times, during the season we've seen, but Jacoby George has had this happen chronically, and I can't remember. I think it was against NC State, so against NC State when they messed up on the 4th down, and for no reason, Jacoby George just pushed the NC State cornerback on the fade route,
Right.
and nothing happened to Jacoby, so I think that's something needs to be just. I'm really hoping that when JoJo Trader, Carr, Chance Robinson come in, and if we could pick up somebody in the transfer portal as well, that's a wake up call to Jacoby that he's not going to be able to get away with that anymore, because there's guys that are as talented or even more talented him coming in that could replace him, at the same position with the same skill set that he has.
Yeah, and those names you mentioned, I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those guys compete for playing time their first year, especially JoJo Trader, to me, who they want to use him in the slot, he said, and that makes a lot of sense for him to kind of come in and hopefully do what Brashard Smith was doing here. Brashard Smith has hit the transfer portal, which is unfortunate. I think he was frustrated probably about not getting on the field enough.
Mhm.
I hope, listen, I hope they don't make the same mistakes with the next guys, because JoJo Trader and Carr can play a similar role. You already mentioned Ray Joseph and Robbie Washington. These guys all have really dynamic, explosive skill sets. So, finding ways to use them in creative ways and get them in space, I thought that was something that the coaches didn't do a good enough job of this past season. And you've got to take advantage. When you have players who are that good and that explosive and that quick, you have to find a way to get the football to players like that. Chris Johnson, the running back heading into his second year, is another one. He's incredibly fast. You've got to find a way to get the football in these guys' hands.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially Chris Johnson, with the speed that he showed the one couple times that he was on the field, for the Canes. I'm really hoping that next season, especially with Don Chaney Jr. hitting the transfer portal as well, we will see a lot more of those young guys as well, throughout the season. One of the things I also want to go over, just that insult to injury after the Rutgers game. We all know that Cam Ward decided to go to the NFL. Many people thought, including myself, that Cam was going to be a Miami Hurricane based upon, the projections that I saw online and things I've heard also, within, the academic atmosphere in sports and athletics. But he doesn't. He chooses the NFL. Much luck to him. As well. I was kind of shocked because being that he was projected to be a third, fourth round pick, maybe I thought he'd make a little bit more money at Miami, financially speaking. And I also thought that if he has a Michael Penix kind of year, like Michael Penix had over Washington, he can improve his draft stock and be a first round pick for the following season. But he made his decision, and it's good for him. I'm sure he knows more than we do. So one of the things I mentioned on my show, and I know you're a big fan of this guy, and I like him too, is if Cam Ward strings you along, if you have a chance to get Will Howard, get Will Howard. Okay. I mean, Will Howard is dynamic. He's big, reminds me a bit of Josh Allen in terms of his size and the way he runs physically, as well. Have you heard anything? And because Will Howard's recruitment has been all over the place. He's been linked to USC. Oh, he's going to commit to USC. No, he's a Buckeye. Nothing's happened yet. The only people that know where they're going is the actual kid himself or themselves. So have you heard anything on the Will Howard front as far as that concerns, or is it just smoke and mirrors we're hearing right now?
Yeah, I've heard a lot today, and it's not anything a Miami fan is going to want to hear. And again, like, listen, sometimes these reports are wrong, right? I think everybody learned this with Cam Ward. If people thought for sure he was coming, like, these things don't always work out that way. But I meant like a 99.8% that Will Howard is going to be an Ohio State Buckeye. So here's the situation. From my understanding, Will Howard has been silent committed to Ohio State for over a week. He's going to be making an official visit there this weekend, and that's where you expect the paperwork to be signed, and they're going to make it official. The reason why things have been kind of quiet over the past week plus, I'm a little unclear on the timeline, somewhere between a week and 2 weeks. Why it's been so quiet is this is actually kind of smart from Ryan Day and the Ohio State coaching staff. So they wanted to keep this information as under wraps as they possibly could up until the deadline to enter the transfer portal, because they have some other young quarterbacks on their roster that they didn't want those quarterbacks to find out Will Howard is committed, because then you may lose somebody by the portal deadline, which was Tuesday at midnight or Wednesday morning at midnight, depending on how you want to look at it. So I think it's been kind of understood in recruiting circles for the past several days that Will Howard is going to be an Ohio State Buckeye. And part of why I bring that up is the feedback I've been getting is that he's not really taking pitches from anyone else for a little while. Does that mean Miami has stopped trying? Probably not. I mean, one thing we know about Mario Cristobal is he doesn't give up until the ink is dry, right? I mean, they were still recruiting Jeremiah Smith right up until he faxed his paperwork in on National Signing Day. So maybe they haven't given up on Will Howard, but it's generally believed he's going to Ohio State. So, unfortunately, if that does come to pass within the next couple days, that would mean Miami has basically missed out on their top two quarterback targets. There is something, I'll say this about Cam Ward, and I was talking about this on my Wednesday episode of Locked on Canes. Now, I have mentally moved on from Ward, but I had a conversation with an Auburn insider this morning who told me that he doesn't think Auburn has given up on Ward. And here's what's going on there, Will. Even though Cam Ward did publicly declare for the NFL, he hasn't hired an agent yet. So he's not forfeited his eligibility. So he still technically hasn't fully broken through that wall of 1,000% committed to the NFL. Until he hires an NFL agent, he still is technically eligible to play another year of college. And apparently Auburn is still making pitches to him. I don't know for a fact that Miami is. That I don't have that information, but it sounds like Auburn is, which tells you, hey, maybe Ward is not 1,000% committed to the NFL yet. Now, I wouldn't want Miami to hold out hope for another week and a half there, because you can't afford to miss any more time. So maybe Miami's moved on from Ward. It sounds like Auburn hasn't.
Well, that's interesting. Listen, I mean, I'll be honest, I was a Will Rogers guy, when all this stuff started. Yeah. I really liked Will Rogers, but he was, pretty much a Washington guy, right from the bat. But I liked Will. And then Cam was my other guy. I like Cam. I like the dynamic he brings to the table, like his arm, his arm strength, his capability. But I will say this, I think Miami's biggest problem this past season was competent quarterback play. if Tyler Van Dyke wasn't such a turnover machine, especially after the bye week, I do think Miami would have been a 10-win team playing, in a pretty good bowl game, as well. Woulda, coulda, shoulda, we don't know, but I do think that's the case because a lot of the interceptions that Tyler threw were in timely situations and it stagnated and stalled drives to the offense. That being said, all I really think Miami needs is a competent quarterback. That's a veteran that won't upset the locker room. That's why I think the Malachi Coleman thing kind of I don't think we should touch because you have Ja'Cory that decided to stay another year. And Emory Williams broke his arm, for you, against Florida State. And you have Judd the Stud coming in and Luke Nickel coming in. So I think going with a quarterback that has a lot of eligibility you might have to do some explaining, to the quarterbacks you currently have on the roster. So some of the guys we're going to talk about right now that I brought up with you before we went on air are 3 guys that have been circling online that Canes fans are kind of think we should give a look at. The first one I want to go over, and this is like my least favorite because I think he has too much eligibility. Again, like the Malachi Coleman situation, and that is Jaden Maivia. I also don't like the touchdown to turnover ratio on him for the season. He had 63% completions. He was a freshman playing over for UNLV. Over 3,000 yards passing, 17 touchdowns, but 10 picks. How do you feel about him as far as quarterback play goes? Is this a guy you would like to see in orange and green next year? Is it somebody that we can move on from for someone who's a bit more proven as a veteran? What's your take on Jaden Maivia?
I don't feel great about him. And it's not this is one I haven't watched play as much as the other names you're going to mention, but the first thing I did when I saw Miami linked to a UNLV quarterback was, I reached out to my friend and mentor Larry Bluestein, who attended UNLV, and he follows their program very closely because I know he's watched this young man a lot more than I have. I think I watched like a 90-second long highlight reel on him, which is obviously only showing you the good stuff, right? Yeah, basically, what I was told was it's not a whole lot different from Ja'Cory Brown, who Miami already has, and probably the reason why he's leaving UNLV is that there's a quarterback or even 2 quarterbacks on their roster that he's expecting to get beat out by next year. So, you do the math and it's like, maybe there's still potential there, but if this guy didn't feel like he's the best quarterback on UNLV's roster for next year, I don't know what that would mean for him coming to Miami. So it doesn't blow me away. Now, again, like I'm basing a lot of this on one person's opinion on him. And I'm also basing a lot of it on what you said as well, Will, about, he's got 3 years of eligibility left, which again, it doesn't really give you the best situation with the quarterbacks you already have. Like, it's why I think Miami needs a 1-year bridge guy, and Jaden doesn't give you that. And it doesn't sound to me like he's head and shoulders better than Ja'Cory Brown. He might not be any better than Ja'Cory Brown from what I hear. Yeah,
no, I agree with you on that one. I do like this guy, though. We're going to go over it next, and that is Liberty University quarterback Caden Salter. Okay, had a very solid season. He completed 61% of his passes, almost 3,000 yards passing. What I like here is the efficiency. 32 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions, 6'1", not the tallest guy in the world, but I think tall enough, especially if he's going to be used in a mobile situation as well. Have you heard anything about Caden and Miami being in contact with him, or what do you think about him possibly being that bridge gap for the future?
Yeah, I can't speak for how much contact Miami's had with him, but it seems logical they would be interested because he's dynamic. The other stat in there that's relevant for Caden Salter is he's over 1,000 rushing yards this past year. I mean, he is a dual threat. I know, at Liberty, he wasn't playing against the same kind of competition he would play against in Miami, but he's as dynamic of a dual threat guy as you could find. Really aggressive down the field, good, accurate, deep ball. He's a little on the smaller side, but you can make that work for you in college. Like that would hurt him, when he tries to get into the NFL. But I think he's big enough because he's shifty enough and slippery enough to be a college quarterback. I like what I see there. So with Caden Salter, when he entered the transfer portal, my initial concern is he going to end up at Auburn? And that's actually the reason why I was in contact with an Auburn insider this morning. The conversation started with Caden Salter before we started talking about Cam Ward. Because with Caden Salter, he was recruited by Hugh Freeze at Liberty, who's now at Auburn. The two of them have a really good relationship, which made me wonder, are the Auburn Tigers going to go all in? And his relationship with Freeze could be a big advantage. The Auburn people don't seem to be convinced that Auburn is pursuing him heavily. So that would be good news for Miami, right? Because again, it would be tough to beat out the coach who initially recruited him to Liberty. But if Auburn isn't really going after Caden Salter, then that could give Miami an opening to bring him in. So again, I don't know how much communication there has been between Miami and Salter, but I would take it as good news that it doesn't sound like Auburn is very interested.
That's awesome. Glad to hear that. Another fan favorite actually is Jordan Mcloud from James Madison. Now his efficiency rating is pretty high as well. Almost 70% completion of passes, almost 4,000 yards passing, 3,657 to be exact, 35 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. He would get kind of like the same flack a bit like Salter did, that James Madison doesn't play the competition that, let's say, a Will Rogers, a Cam Ward plays. What's your thought on Jordan Mcloud though?
I like him a lot as well, and I know that one of the concerns people have brought up to me about him, because he's from Tampa. He actually started his career at USF before he went to James Madison, and like, some of the USF fans are like, oh, this guy wasn't very good at USF. I mean, he was probably a late bloomer. I mean, first season or two at USF, I'd like to believe he, really became a different quarterback, because his tape at James Madison looks incredible. Again, really, really aggressive downfield passer. He doesn't run as much as Caden Salter, but he did score like 7 or 8 rushing touchdowns, and he's got good escapability, can extend plays in the pocket. So I think he'd be a really good option, and he's got one final year of eligibility left. Even Salter actually has 2 years left. Jordan Mcloud has just 1 year left, so he's got that extra year of experience. I think he could be, and this is somebody, when the transfer portal first opened, even before all the Cam Ward stuff intensified, right? Like even before I thought Miami may have a chance at Ward, McLeod, I was going to call him McCord. McLeod was one of the first names that I brought up on Locked On Canes, because I thought, hey, this guy could check off a lot of boxes. So I really like him. Like he might be maybe my top choice. Another one to kind of watch out for, because it seems like he does have a desire to play down here if he can get one more year of eligibility, is Talia Tungavailoa, who he technically has burned all of his collegiate eligibility. He's leaving Maryland, to his younger brother. And so I think that I'm sure the family would love to have, the two, at least for 1 year, to have them both in the same city. And Talia would like to be close to Tua. But I think the issue there is that, he started his career at Alabama before he transferred to Maryland. I would have to go back and figure out what the heck happened his first season at Bama, because Nick Saban, for whatever reason, used him in 5 games, not 4, because you can play 4 games and still preserve your red shirt. Nick Saban used him in 5 games, and to my recollection, none of those were meaningful games. Like, it's not like he was starting, we need Talia to come in. Like, I don't know why Saban decided to use him as a true freshman in 1 more game than he needed to play in. So I don't know if he would use like that as like his basis to try to get a waiver from the NCAA, but I wouldn't sleep on Talia. Again, who's, he turns it over a little bit too much for me, but he does have the experience. He is a pretty good, Power 5 starting quarterback, an above average Power 5 starting quarterback, and I'm sure he would love to be, in the same city with Tua for at least 1 year. So that's another one I would look out for.
That's interesting. The fact that he's a possibility. I know that he burned his eligibility, so I don't see how he'll be able to,
Yeah.
Get the NCAA to renegotiate, based upon the fact he was used for 5 games in garbage time. I'm assuming might have been the
Like
case.
again, I have to go back and look at that first year, because I don't recall him playing like any like he needs to play today. So I don't know why Saban used him in 5 games. I have to go back and review that one.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Next season is going to be so let's say Miami gets no quarterback, in the transfer portal. I don't see them not doing that, but I think someone's going to come here, but they get no quarterback. How do you see, you mentioned on your show that there was a big gap between, Tyler Van Dyke in terms of years and Jacory and Emery. So how would you see that playing out? Do you think that I mean, Emery did seem he was favored by the staff a little bit, but Jacory did show, that he has a little bit of a more intangible as far as being able to extend plays. He's able to take more hits because he's a more physical guy. Where do you see the quarterback situation playing out if we don't get a transfer quarterback and it'll be Emery versus Jacory for QB1 next year?
I think in that scenario, it would be a really close competition between the two of them. And I don't know how much I would read into, Emery being the second stringer this past year, because I know Brown wanted to redshirt. So I think that, I have to wonder that if he didn't personally desire a redshirt year, if maybe he would have been the second stringer and not Emery. But with that said, Emery, he impressed me a little bit, managing games, right? You talk about the upside. Obviously I think Brown definitely has more upside with his dual threat capabilities, but Emery has a strong, accurate arm, and he's very smart, doesn't make a lot of mistakes, which is really important in a quarterback. So, at what point does he kind of bridge the gap from game manager to like an actual playmaker? Because we haven't really seen that. Like from what we saw of Emery Williams, good game manager, right? The opposite of what Tyler Van Dyke was doing last year, where this kid was not throwing interceptions, but he also wasn't hitting a whole lot of highlight reel plays. But he was taking care of the football, right? So, I mean, and I think he's very talented, right? So a lot of true freshmen thrown into those situations against two of the tougher defenses you faced against, Clemson and Florida State. A lot of true freshmen would be asked to manage games in those situations. So can Emery Williams, make that step where he goes from being a game manager to more of a playmaker? That's just what we haven't seen from him yet. He is recovering from the broken arm. Cristobal did say that he should be good to go for spring football, but college coaches are not the most reliable sources of information on injuries. I don't know if you've noticed. So again, I don't know. I take it with a grain of salt, right? Because college coaches are not always the best with timelines on injury recovery. So, he is losing some time in the workouts and stuff, even if he is good to, and it's good that his broken arm was the non-throwing arm, which is obviously good. So he can still do a little bit of limited throwing, even though he's got, his other arm is broken. So it's not like he's going to completely atrophy in his throwing arm or anything like that. But I would probably favor Jacari Brown slightly in an open competition, because he does have the more physically mature body. I mean, Emery is taller, but Brown is he's just got his body is 1 year ahead basically out of high school, and he's got a little bit more weight and size, and he's got a little bit more experience, and he adds that element of being able to run the football that Emery can run a little bit. I mean, he broke his arm on a big time running play, but Brown is obviously, he's the more dual threat guy. So I would probably favor Brown slightly in an open competition, and that open competition could be good for both of them, right? I mean, they're both competitive guys. Brown decided to stay at Miami because he wanted to compete for playing time. Everything I know about Emery Williams is he just wants to go out there and be better every day. So I hope that competition would bring out the best in both of these guys, but I'd give the slight edge to Brown.
Yeah, I agree with you. As far as Brown goes, I think that Brown, he showed me something, in the Rutgers game as well. I think the best throw we had was the one that was called back and not a touchdown, even though we
Yeah.
saw the still shots, it was a touchdown, but that was a
Yeah.
fantastic throw. He threw it perfectly to Xavier Restrepo behind the defender, where only Restrepo could catch it. So he's made a lot of promise. One of the biggest concerns I had about Jacory before the Rutgers game was the last two times I saw Jacory, he was basically the worst passer on the field, at the spring game, and also at the scrimmage, over at Canes Fest. So that was like my thing about Jacory. But, I figured with practice and so on, there has to be some sort of improvement. And like I said, he played the way I expected him to play. He was going to make some throws, because, he wants to show that he could start, but also he was going to miss some throws because or throw a little bit behind because he hasn't had that live action game speed, that Emery had and Tyler Van Dyke had as well. So,
True.
so I do think Jacory does have the edge physically and also because of experience. Going back a little bit to speak of injuries, I just popped in my head a follow-up question. What have you heard about Mark Fletcher? I know he got hurt in the Rutgers game and it seemed pretty serious.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. All I know was his X-rays were negative, but I think
Okay.
I don't think that rules out any possible ligament damage. I think that just rules out fractures. So I haven't heard anything since then. It obviously looks somewhat serious on the field. So he's got about and he probably doesn't need spring football as much as some other guys do, because he didn't even play spring football last year, and
Yeah.
he ended up being arguably Miami's best running back by the end of his true freshman season. So rest and recover. Hopefully it's not overly serious, but I really haven't heard anything in the past week, good or bad.
Okay. Well, so hopefully it's good.
Yeah,
He's very talented and a good kid too. It'd be a shame if he misses any time during the season.
yeah.
All right, so let's go into the young players for next season. All right, we talked about the wide receiver position. We talked about JoJo Trader. How much of a role will all three play? Because they're very talented. You have to get those three guys on the field at some capacity when you can. Chance Robinson, JoJo, and Nikar. So what do you expect from the coaching staff this season? Especially in year 2 of Shannon Dawson's office, because usually it's the second year we really see the offenses kind of work when you have a second-year coordinator.
Yeah, I think that just based on the lack of preparation he's going to have, I'd probably think Chance Robinson would be less of a factor in the first year, because he's not able to enroll early, so he won't be around for spring. So you might just need a little bit more patience and development time with Robinson, who I think he's got a little more size than the other guys. So, could be more of a boundary receiver in the future. You might have to wait a little bit longer before he starts getting meaningful action. A lot of people sleep on Nikar just because he's not a Florida kid. Like we tend to, people who cover Miami like you and me, and you're involved in the high school world down here. We tend to pay a lot more attention to people like JoJo Trader and a little less to somebody like Nikar because they're out of state. But everything I've seen from him on tape and everything I've heard about Carr is he seems to be already a pretty solid fundamental route runner, and that he's very, very mentally mature to go along with his great physical gifts. So you'd like to think that they could find a role for him his first year. You never know, because I expected Ray Joseph to play a little bit more than he did his first year. I still think he's going to end up breaking out, but you never know, because sometimes you expect a guy to get on the field a lot more the first year, and it doesn't play out the way you expected it to. But I definitely think JoJo Trader is going to find a role. I think he's going to be probably Xavier Restrepo's backup, probably right off the bat. And, obviously there are situations where Miami has sometimes 4 and 5 receivers on the field at once. So even if he's not one of the 3 starters, I think he could be one of those next man up type of guys, because he's going to be deadly if you get him the football in space. So I think he'll just based on what I've seen, I think JoJo will probably have the biggest role the first year, and then Nikar, and then Chance Robinson, probably in that order.
Yeah, if you look at video of JoJo Trader, he's an absolute beast. He was overshadowed because of how good and successful and how highly publicized the recruitment of Jeremiah Smith was. But if you look at his huddle, if you look even recently, in the Under Armour All American game and so on, when he's making some catches and so on, he was pretty effective, as well, making one-handed catches. And so I think Miami's going to find itself that he's going to have, or Miami fans are going to find themselves they have a very successful wide receiver for the future, because he's an absolute beast. He's a freak when it comes to talent. That tiptoe touchdown reception in the state championship game just said it all. That was an NFL style catch. I mean, he got both feet in, tippy-toed, and ended up in the end zone. So expect a lot of that, as far as his production in Miami goes. One of the things that was talked about, early recruiting, in 2023, for the 2023 heading in class of 2024, is that Miami was having difficulty closing defensive tackles. Now, I know you know him, and he's a good friend of the show as well. Joe from You Heard, he has a phrase that says, "Wake me up when December comes." And Miami cleaned up in December as far as the defensive line goes, from edge rushers to the interior, flipping Justin Scott, which makes me so happy that you flip him from Ohio State. Being able to hold on to Artavius Jones, who was being pursued by Florida State as well. Dalen Russell, who I think is extremely underrated, the talented tackle coming out of Columbus. And of course, let's talk about the edge rushers that Miami was able to sign, like Lightfoot and Booker Pickett, as well, and Rudolph. So Miami now has some defensive line depth, young but defensive line depth as well. Who do you think is going to break out this season, from that group of freshman year?
I think one of the under the radar guys who people just don't talk about him enough. And again, he's from outside the state of Florida, so that's just that just happens with people who cover Miami. Cole McConaughey, who's out of Alabama.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
I- he was the sack leader in the entire state of Alabama, which has very good high school football state, right? I know we have a Florida bias here, but
Yep.
Alabama, very good high school football state. He was the leading sacker in that entire state. I think McConaughey has a chance to be a breakout guy. I think I'd like to think Artavius Jones and Justin Scott can have an impact the first year, even though I don't think either of them is able to enroll early for spring. I know Scott for sure is not. I've heard Artavius may not be able to come early either, which would put them just a little bit behind the eight ball. But they're both just so physically dominant that maybe they can kind of bridge that mental gap a little bit quicker, because Lance Guidry's defense is not an easy one to learn for
Mhm.
true freshmen, especially when you're not there for spring football. But defensive tackle is not always the most complicated position, and these guys have the physical maturity. I wonder, like with Armando Blunt as well, who actually will be enrolling early, despite the fact that he academically was so far ahead, because he's like in the middle of his junior year of high school, but he's already been able to graduate and enroll early. I just wonder, like the fact that he's literally only, I think he's 16 years old still. How will he be ready to hit the ground running? But he's got very good size, certainly for his age. He'll end up being probably around the same size that Ruben, maybe a little smaller, but close to about the same. He's taller than Ruben Bain, but like weight wise, he'll probably be like around the same area that Ruben Bain was his freshman year. So hopefully Armando Blunt can hit the ground running. But Marquise Lightfoot, definitely. I mean, he's just so polished. And the guy who's been really turning a lot of heads at the Under Armour All America practices has been Booker Pickett. Like, I don't know what his final star tally, if he's a 3-star guy, I think, but he's been out there competing with 4- and 5-star offensive linemen and holding his own and looking really good. So, I think this is probably the best defensive line class Miami has ever had. I mean, just in terms of just pure quality and depth, I don't think we've ever had a better class than this at the D line.
Yeah, McCarthy's very good. If you look at his tape, he reminds me of J.J. Watt.
Yeah.
Just the speed, getting around, left tackles and so on, and he tackles with such violence, as well when he hits the quarterback. So he's he's a best defensive player in the state of Alabama, but 247 put him as a 3-star, and I
Yeah.
think he's very undervalued as far as that goes. He's definitely not a 3-star, but we talked about how they come up with those composites, as well. Mr. Donno, thank you so much for joining us. Before we let you go, where else can we find you? I know from Locked On Canes, but you do a lot of things here in South Florida. You're like the utility man over in radio, in the radio world over at QAM. So let us know where to find you.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously you can find me at Locked On Canes every single day, and you can follow the show on X at Locked On Canes. I turn up a lot on WQAM. So the next time I'm definitely going to be on, because I do post games after Miami Dolphins games, and so thankfully they're in the playoffs and the regular season is not over yet. So we'll be on late night after the Buffalo game this Sunday. So I'm gonna have a lot of coffee that day, because we're going till 2 a.m. on post game after the Sunday night game. So you can find me there. And you can also find some of my written work at allhurricanes.com. That's the Miami Sports Illustrated site. We keep people updated all day at allhurricanes.com. So check that out as well.
All right. Alex, once again, thank you for joining us again. Please follow Alex Donno over at X on Locked On Canes. Also, please watch and like and subscribe to Locked On Canes as well. He does a great job, and he has amazing guests. Some of the friends of the show, like Chalupa Batman and Hoodie Girl as well, Coach Coop. So please follow, subscribe, share. Great guy, great information, great insight as well. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you heard, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to 305 Sports Now. Once again, I am Will. Thank you again, Mr. Alex Donno. Stay safe. God bless. See you soon. Go Canes. And let's not forget, go Fins. Fins up, Canes, and Fins up, right? Let's beat Buffalo. Bye-bye, guys.
Yes, please.